Chapter 14, Urasil's Door. The door next to Gio's opened with a creak in the main entrance hall. Requiem, Freya and Urasil were sitting on the floor playing with Havoc. Silently they gazed apprehensively into the opening. "The Great Oaf did it," Urasil said, with a mix of disbelief and joy. Turning to the others, he continued jubilantly, "I vote we use paper, scissors, rock to decide who goes next." Stirring, Requiem rose to the challenge. "All right, you're on." Each gathered a pile of dust and held it in clenched fists in the middle of the circle. In unison they called, 1, 2, 3. On 3, each of them opened their fists. As Requiem's dust fell to the floor, he converted it into some scissors, which bobbed in mid-air. It was about to be crushed by Freya's rock when, out of nowhere, Requiem's scissors were blown apart and Freya's rock shot to pieces. "What is that, Urasil?" asked Freya sharply, giving him a most disapproving look. "A gun. I win," he replied cheerily, beaming from ear to ear, showing how pleased he was with his own cunning. "You can't do that," Freya snapped as she got up from the floor to scowl down at Urasil. Some cultural rivalries run deep, and her annoyance at being outwitted by a dusty old Westgater, friend or no, was quite clear. His victory was becoming all the sweeter with Freya's building annoyance, and Urasil couldn't resist one final dig. "Freya, my dear, I thought you more than anyone would appreciate progress." Dumbfounded, Freya stayed silent with her mouth agape, looking most ungainly. Requiem found it quite brilliant and applauded Urasil's manoeuvre. "I like it," he said brightly. "There's hope for us all yet." Requiem shook Urasil's hand vigorously and bid him farewell before moving to one side, letting Freya say goodbye. Whispering into Urasil's ear, she said, "You take care of yourself, you old dusty. I want a rematch, you hear?" as she lovingly squeezed the life out of him. "Don't worry," he managed. "I'll see you in the library. You can be sure of it." Urasil's gentle smile was enough for Freya to know that she couldn't always protect her old-fashioned friend, and that just maybe he had a few tricks up his sleeve that would see him through. With that in mind, she let Urasil head to the door. Just as he was about to step in, he stopped. I'd better look the part, I suppose." Urasil transformed his safari gear into his usual robes before striding confidently through the door. The door slammed shut with such ferocity that Freya's hair flew behind her head. Pensively, Freya returned to the floor to join Requiem and stroked Havoc to take her mind off things. Requiem knew all too well how protective Freya was of Urasil, and did his best to reassure her. "Don't worry. If any of us is going to make it to the library, it will be Urasil. He is an Akatsuki on a mission. Besides, I think they call him Grand Master for good reason." With a sigh, Freya shared her concerns. "I know. It's just that he can never make things easy on himself. If he's confronted with a maze, he'll check every part of it long after he's found the way out, just in case he missed something, you know?" Requiem smiled. "It's not like we've got anywhere to go." Lying on the floor, with his arms behind his head, looking at the single eye socket that was keeping the monsters at bay, he added, "Anyway, he really needs some time to read that book, for all our sakes." Turning her gaze up to the light, Freya broke into a half-smile. "I think the Book of Morpheus and Minerva will take a while to read, even with Urasil's blazing pace. There just isn't a maze big enough." Cocking his head towards Freya, Requiem said, "Oh, I meant the egg-cooking book. Did you try his eggs and soldiers in Turkey?" "Lethal." Freya was not to know just how pertinent her comment was. Waving away the dust as he spluttered, Urasil found himself in a corridor of vast sandstone walls with a red dust floor. With the delicacy of an elephant, Urasil patted the floor in front of him with his foot to make sure it wasn't a trap. Once the plumes of red dust had died down and he could breathe again, Urasil tentatively prodded one of the large sandstone blocks to his left. "Safe enough," he said to himself, Feeling that his highly scientific tests were stringent enough to find any dangers, he walked forward boldly. It was not long until the corridor provided a choice of left or right. Shrugging, and with no more reason than he was right-handed, he chose right. Urasil had indeed started as he meant to continue, and carried on making arbitrary choices based on handedness and the flip of a coin, which grew in the number of sides it had depending on the number of possible paths. After a while, of what he would no doubt call analysis when recounting the story, Urasil came to a profound conclusion which he shared with the sandstone. "This is a maze," he whispered. Once he had finished wagging his finger at the sandstone, he stood tall and declared, "Simple enough. As long as I keep my left hand touching the wall at all times, I'll eventually find my way through." If Urasil had wanted memorable points to help chart his course, he was to be disappointed. The identical towering walls of the vast, featureless maze blocked any view of its setting. The dusty red floor offered no relief from the blandness of the surround. The still silence was only broken by a faint echoing drip in the distance, the sound of Urasil's feet disturbing the dust, and his hand tracing the wall. Left. Left. Yes. Right. Another left. Urasil muttered to himself as he made his way through the maze methodically. Hours passed, and back in the entrance hall, Freya was recounting tales of Urasil's mind-boggling impracticality. "You know, he even got lost in one of his own libraries," she chuckled. Requiem couldn't help but laugh also. "I bet that's what the task is. He has to navigate his way out of a paper bag." Falling back with laughter and holding her sides, Freya found it hard to breathe. "Oh, stop! It hurts! How can anyone so stupendously smart have such little common sense? Oh, I do hope he's all right. After all, paper bags can be so big." Freya and Requiem rolled around laughing, trying to keep their spirits up, whilst the creatures in the shadows chatted to one another, in their unnerving hissing and clinking tongue. They were determined not to think the worst. Even though so much time had passed, they were sure Urasil was doing fine. Back in the maze, however, all was not going well. Left. Left. Yes. Right. Another left, Urasil muttered. Wait. I've said that sentence 100 times already since I've been here. Urasil stopped and scratched his head. Gazing forlornly at the sandstone to his left, he began to fall into a trance-like state. The drip, drip, dripping of the water gnawed away at him. The drips felt heavier now, and each one came down like a hammer in Urasil's mind. Drip, drip, he muttered, staring into the nothingness. Drip, he continued, as he bounced his head with every sound. Suddenly Urasil came to, and wagged his finger at the wall he had been staring at. "Aha!" he shouted. "I've seen you before, you little dimple. Yes, you." Erratically, Urasil made his way over to one of the large sandstone blocks in the wall, just below waist height, and knelt to examine it more closely. "Yes, I'm sure of it. I'm a master of observation, and I've definitely seen you before, my unassuming little friend." Urasil cast his eyes up to a ceiling he could not see, thanks to the dim light. Pointing upwards, he shouted into the nothingness. "You think you can drive me mad with your bland landscape and incessant dripping, but you can't, you know." Urasil looked in front and then behind. "Right," he said. "Now, if I'm sure I've seen this wall before, it means that I must have come by here already. But there are no footprints ahead of me." Casting an eye backwards, he observed, "But I am leaving tracks. What does it mean? What does it mean?" As he paced, the dripping sound continued to disturb his thoughts. Just as he was onto a new lead, a loud splash would shunt him off track. In frustration at his fragile state of mind, Urasil plunged his hands into his pockets. A prolonged squeak echoed around the maze. The noise was, of course, Bombardier, the yellow-rubber duck which acted as Urasil's key to his sanctuary. Whether it was divine intervention or just plain luck, Bombardier's squeak cancelled out the sound of the dripping, just long enough for Urasil to collect his thoughts. "Ha! Very clever indeed. You nearly had me." There are two explanations for what is going on here. One, the walls are moving, but if that is the case, I'm sure I would have heard great lumps of sandstone shuffling. No, it's something else, something even more clever. Casting his head to the ceiling once more, Urasil produced Bombardier from his pocket and pressed down hard. No, this wall is exactly where it should be, as will all the other ones ahead be, and all the ones I have already encountered. I've seen this wall before, but I've not been here before. How could this be? With one last squeak of Bombardier, Urasil answered his own question. Because I'm in a fractal. I'm in a vast maze made up of building blocks of the same maze, over and over again. It's perpetual. No matter how far I go, once I've completed one maze, I just meet another one exactly the same, and on to infinity. Holding Bombardier close to his face, he whispered somewhat manically, So, Bombardier, what does this mean? Squeezing Bombardier so that he gave off a very low and creaky squeak, Urasil continued, Let me tell you, my rubberized companion, with integral speaker, it means that the only door here is the one I came through to begin with. Urasil held Bombardier even closer, as he continued to whisper, So, where is that door? I could continue until I reach where I think the door was, but, as we know, it now looks like one of these sandstone walls. It could be tricky to find the right one, but, with perseverance, I think we can find it. Shaking Bombardier from side to side, Urasil said in false surprise, No, too human, you say? Urasil nodded Bombardier slowly, animating his otherwise stoic rubber-duck companion. I suppose you have a point. I am an Akatsuki after all, and a thumping good one at that. Yes, we've played their twisted game for long enough. Time to show our true colours. Carefully, Urasil placed Bombardier back in his pocket before flinging his arms wide in the air. Time to level the playing field, he declared. Without further ado, Urasil pulled his arms down so that his forearms covered his face. The dust on the ground started to disappear. Cold crept in as the dripping turned to shattering and then to silence. Urasil gathered a massive amount of energy from his surroundings. He unravelled the molecules that made the red dust, took the heat from the air, and even turned the water into ice. As he flung his arms out to his sides, tidal waves of energy flew to the left and right, blowing down the walls like dominoes. Looking around and listening as wall upon wall collapsed, Urasil said, Well, this could go on forever, and there's no sign of a door anywhere. Looking at the light above, he added, The only way from here is up. As Urasil raised his hand, the sandstone blocks from which the walls were made formed a staircase in front of him, leading up to the light. Urasil started up the stairs, which continued to form in front of him until, blink, his head met thick glass. Rubbing it and looking up, Urasil pondered. Interesting. A giant light bulb, perhaps. No. A boundary between fact and fiction, I think. Looking down, Urasil could see the sprawling fractal maze collapsing, but he still couldn't see where the dripping had come from. Putting his hand to the glass, Urasil pushed upwards, slowly at first, and then forcibly. Above him came the sound of cracks racing. The light died, the maze disappeared, and, unfortunately for Urasil, so did the stairs. He leapt just before the last step vanished and bowled into an office. As he dusted himself off, Urasil noticed that he was covered in shards of glass. Looking down at his feet, there was not a trace of dust or sandstone to be seen. There was, however, the distinct odour of smoke. He turned to look at where he had come from and came face to face with a computer screen. Urasil chuckled to himself. I should have known that such a modern monstrosity was behind it all. If I'd realised I was inside a computer program, I would have given it a short circuit for its trickery. But there you go, beggars can't be choosers. Now, where am I? Looking around, Urasil could see that he was in an opulent office. A grand wooden desk sat at its centre, with a now thoroughly broken old-fashioned computer monitor. This held only a fleeting fascination for Urasil, before his eye was caught by the antique bookshelves lining 3 of the 4 walls. Realising there was no door to be seen, Urasil tried pulling random books from the shelves to see if they triggered a hidden exit. This was a slow process, and, really, just an excuse to examine the books. After satisfying himself that there were no books here that weren't in one of his libraries, Urasil's attention was drawn to the wall of glass behind the desk. Sliding the window open, he stepped out onto a balcony and into a tropical island scene. Breathing in the fresh air with sun beaming down on his face, Urasil smiled. Out of the corner of his eye, something glistened in the sun. Suddenly, Urasil became very excited. "Ooh, a driving range!" Urasil looked out to sea. Bobbing in the calm waters were floating flags with distances marked upon them. Urasil sauntered over to the patch of fake grass with an eager smile, picked up a glistening club and took up his driving stance. As he wiggled into position, he changed his clothes into a tartan flat cap, matching tank top and cream trousers tucked into white socks before swinging hard. "4!" he shouted, gazing at the ball flying through the air. Before it landed, a voice rang out. "Congratulations!" "Thank you," said Urasil, "but it hasn't landed yet." The ball landed a few metres off the nearest flag. Looking up at the sky, Urasil corrected himself. "Oh, congratulations on completing the task, I see." Putting another ball down, he declared, "You'll be congratulating me for my superb driving skills in a moment. You just wait and see. 4!" Urasil hit another ball aimlessly into the sea.